All right, everyone, get ready for this, because today we're going deep into the world of Professor Kuo.
Oh, yeah, he's not your average professor.
Definitely not. This guy uses data analysis, right, to solve real-world problems, but get this, he even uses ancient Chinese wisdom.
Yeah, it's a really interesting mix.
It's a unique approach.
Professor Kuo has this impressive background. I mean, he's got a PhD in finance. He's won awards for his research. He's a consultant.
Wow.
Yeah, he's worked with major companies and across all sorts of fields, too.
Oh, really? Like what?
Like investment management, global supply chains.
Wow.
And he even helps businesses become more sustainable, which is really interesting.
That's pretty cool.
But what I think is most interesting is his whole focus on using data to make smarter decisions.
Yeah.
And not just, in business, but like everywhere.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
But how does ancient wisdom, fit in with all this?
Right.
It seems kind of, I don't know, an odd combination.
Yeah, you'd think so.
Yeah.
But, Professor Kuo, he sees these connections that other people just don't.
Okay.
Like, he's fascinated by the Yijing.
What?
The Yijing, it's an ancient Chinese text. It's also known as the Book of Changes.
Okay.
And he believes it has all these insights that we can still use today. Like, even for things like predicting trends.
Wait, predicting trends using an ancient text?
Yeah.
How does that even work?
Well, one of the most interesting examples is his work on predicting smuggling.
Smuggling?
Yeah, at international borders.
Okay.
He looked at this massive data set, millions of customs records.
Right.
And get this, he was able to predict where smuggled goods would be found with a 93.69% success rate.
93.69%. That is insanely accurate. What kind of smuggled goods are we talking about here?
We're talking serious stuff.
Bro.
The research actually mentions over 800 kilograms of drugs being seized.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Wow.
And he published these findings too. It was in the World Customs Journal back in 2021.
So not only is he successful, but he's also sharing how he does it.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm still trying to wrap my head around how this Yijing thing is involved. It's not like he used it to, magically find the smugglers, did he?
Well, not exactly.
Sure.
It's more about using the principles of the Yijing to kind of guide his analysis.
So like a framework.
Yeah, like a framework. Think of it like he's using it to ask the right questions of the data.
Mm.
The Yijing, it's all about understanding change patterns and how things are connected.
Right. Okay, I can see how that might be relevant to data analysis.
Yeah.
You're looking for patterns for cause and effect.
Yeah.
But can you give us a specific example of how Professor Kuo used those principles in that smuggling case?
Sure. So one of the key concepts in the Yijing is this idea of yin and yang. Those opposing forces that are always interacting and changing.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Well, Professor Kuo applied that concept to the data by looking for factors that seemed unrelated to smuggling, but could actually be influencing it.
So he's looking for these hidden connections.
Exactly. He's looking for connections that might be driving those trends.
So it's a more holistic approach.
Yeah, he's considering way more variables than someone using a traditional data analysis method might.
That is really interesting. It's like he's using the Yijing to broaden his perspective, see things that other analysts wouldn't. But this all seems incredibly complex. Do you have to be an expert in both data analysis and the ancient Chinese philosophy to use this kind of approach?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
And while knowing both fields really well definitely wouldn't hurt,
Right.
I think Professor Kuo's work still offers really valuable insights.
Oh, okay, good.
Even for those of us who, aren't experts in the Yijing.
So what's the main takeaway here for our listeners?
I think the big takeaway is that it's important to be open to new ideas.
Okay, yeah.
And to different perspectives.
Right.
Professor Kuo's work is a great example of that. It's like he's challenging us to think outside the box, right?
Yeah.
And to consider approaches that might seem a little unconventional at first.
So it's not about mastering the Yijing specifically.
Right.
It's about being open to different ways of thinking.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that sometimes the best solutions come from unexpected places.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And that's something we can all do, no matter what we do for a living, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'm starting to see the appeal of this approach, but let's talk a bit more about what makes Professor Kuo so successful. Is it just this unique blend of ancient wisdom and data analysis, or is there something more to it?
I think it's definitely more than just the blend. although that's a big part of it, for sure.
Yeah.
Professor Kuo has this incredible ability to synthesize information from all these different fields.
Right.
And he sees connections that other people miss.
It's like he can see the forest for the trees.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, and speaking of seeing the whole forest, I know Professor Kuo is also really into this thing called ESG.
ESG.
Yeah.
What's that?
So ESG stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance.
Right.
And it's basically a set of criteria that investors and companies use to kind of evaluate a company's sustainability, like their ethical impact.
So it's not just about profits anymore. It's about how a company affects the world around it.
Exactly, yeah. And Professor Kuo, he helps companies not only meet these standards, but also find opportunities to improve their sustainability.
Wow.
Like reduce their carbon footprint.
That's great. Sustainability is like such a big deal these days.
It is.
And, there's a lot of pressure on companies to be more responsible.
Right.
But how does Professor Kuo's background in finance and data analysis, how does that translate to ESG consulting?
You might think it's a stretch, but it turns out those skills are actually really valuable in that world.
Okay.
For example, Professor Kuo uses his financial modeling expertise to help companies analyze the costs and benefits of, different sustainability initiatives.
So he can help them figure out if it makes sense financially to invest in renewable energy or reducing waste.
Exactly. He's not just telling them what's ethically right. He's showing them how it can benefit them in the long run financially.
That makes sense. It's kind of like bridging the gap between doing good and doing well. Right. But I'm also wondering about the Yijing connection here.
Yeah.
Does he use that in his ESG work as well?
He does, in a way. So the Yijing emphasizes the interconnectedness of everything.
Okay.
And that perspective is really important for ESG issues. Like, for example, when a company's thinking about their environmental impact, right? They have to think about the whole ecosystem, not just their own little bubble.
Oh, I see. So how does that play out in the real world?
Okay, well, let's say a company is trying to use less water.
Okay.
A traditional approach might just be to focus on their own facilities.
Right.
But Professor Kuo, he might encourage them to look at, their suppliers or even their customers' impact on water resources.
So taking a much broader view.
Yeah, like considering the whole supply chain.
That's really smart. It's like that saying, a butterfly flaps its wings and it causes a hurricane on the other side of the world. Everything's connected.
Exactly. And that's where the Yijing perspective can be so powerful. It helps companies see those connections and make, smarter decisions.
This is all fascinating, but how practical is this for the average person? I mean, most people aren't running huge corporations or working on these big global issues. Can we use these principles in our own lives?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest takeaways from Professor Kuo's work is that it's so important to cultivate that mindset of interconnectedness.
Interconnectedness.
Yeah, like recognizing that our actions have consequences, big and small, and, being mindful of our impact on the world.
So it's not necessarily about learning the Yijing itself.
Right.
It's more about shifting our perspective.
Exactly. It's about being more aware of the systems we're part of, our relationships, the ripple effects of our choices. And I think that's something that can benefit everyone no matter what you do.
I love that. It's like Professor Kuo is encouraging us to be more mindful, more thoughtful, and more connected to the world around us.
That's it. And I think that message is really resonating with a lot of people today, especially with everything going on, climate change, social inequality.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's talk about data analysis specifically.
Okay.
So we've discussed how Professor Kuo uses the Yijing to kind of guide his analysis.
Right.
But what about his actual technical skills?
Well, he's got it all. Financial modeling, data visualization, predictive analytics.
Wow.
All the tools a modern data scientist needs.
That's impressive.
But what sets him apart is his ability to combine those technical skills with this deep understanding of human behavior and systems thinking.
So it's not just about crunching numbers, it's about understanding what the numbers actually mean in a larger context.
Exactly. He's not just looking for patterns, he's trying to figure out the stories behind the patterns. Yeah, like narratives.
Oh, I see. So he's using data to uncover stories that we might not otherwise see.
It's kind of like that, yeah. And those stories can be really powerful. They can help us make sense of complicated things,
Yeah.
help us make better decisions and even motivate us to act.
This is making me see data in a whole new light.
Me too.
It's not just cold, hard numbers.
Right.
It's a way to understand the world, make better decisions, and create a better future.
Exactly.
But let's be realistic here. Not everyone has access to the same kind of data or resources that Professor Kuo has. So for those of us who are just starting to think about using data to make decisions, what's a good first step?
That's a great question. And I think the best advice is to start small. You don't need a massive data set or, a PhD to think like a data analyst. Just start by paying attention to the data you see in your daily life.
So things like tracking our spending, our sleep, or even how much time we spend on social media.
Exactly. Those are all great examples. The key is to start asking questions about the data. What patterns are you seeing?
Yeah.
What are they telling you?
Right.
And how can you use those insights to make, even small changes in your life?
That's great advice. It's all about taking that first step, even if it seems tiny. And maybe those small changes will lead to bigger things later on. But what about people who aren't? Like data experts. Are there any tools or resources you recommend for beginners?
Oh, absolutely. There are tons of amazing resources online, free courses, user-friendly software. You don't need to be a statistician to analyze data. Just start exploring and see what you like.
So it's really about taking the plunge and experimenting a bit.
Exactly, yeah. And don't be afraid to ask for help. There's a huge community of people out there who love data and are happy to help.
That's encouraging. It sounds like data analysis is more accessible than I thought.
It really is. And it's just getting easier with all the new tools and tech coming out.
Okay, before we get too carried away, let's get back to Professor Kuo.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about his approach, but what about his impact? What are some of the things he's accomplished with this unique way of using data analysis and ancient wisdom?
Well, besides all the success he's had with predicting smuggling,
Right.
Professor Kuo has also made huge contributions to the world of supply chain management. He's helped companies all over the world optimize their operations, make things more efficient, and lessen their impact on the environment.
So he's not just catching smugglers, he's also making global trade better and more sustainable.
Exactly. And his work has gotten a lot of recognition.
Like what?
Awards, accolades, research grants. He even won a top prize from the executive yuan in his country.
Wow, that's huge.
It is. And he's not just about winning awards, he's really committed to sharing what he knows with others, too.
I know we mentioned that he published his research on smuggling.
Yeah.
But does he do any teaching or outreach?
Oh, absolutely. He's a sought-after speaker, consultant. He's always giving presentations, workshops.
On what?
Data analysis, ESG, and how to use ancient wisdom to solve modern problems.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
He really seems passionate about making a difference.
He is. He's incredibly generous with his time and his knowledge. In fact, he even puts his contact info in some of his work.
Really?
Yeah, encouraging people to reach out if they want to learn more or work with him on projects.
That's pretty rare.
It is.
Especially for someone at his level.
I know, right?
It shows how dedicated he is to sharing his knowledge
Exactly.
and making a positive impact.
It's one of the most inspiring things about him, I think. He's not just brilliant, he's also kind and generous and wants to use his expertise to make the world a better place.
We need more people like that. But before we go, I want to go back to what you said earlier about starting small. What are some practical tips for our listeners who want to start using data in their own lives?
One really easy thing you can do is track your habits.
Okay.
Maybe you want to sleep better, eat healthier, be more productive. Whatever it is, start by just collecting data on your current habits. Track your sleep, your food intake, how much time you spend on different tasks.
So just be more aware and track it.
Exactly. Once you have some data, you can start to analyze it. Look for those patterns. Are you sleeping enough? Are you eating right? Are you spending your time on the things that matter most?
That's a great point. It's about taking that first step. And, who knows, maybe those small changes will turn into something bigger later on.
Absolutely.
But what about for people who aren't data wizards? Any recommendations for resources or tools that are good for beginners?
Oh, yeah, for sure. There are so many great resources online, free courses, easy-to-use software. You don't need a PhD to get started. Just explore a little and see what works for you.
It sounds like data analysis is more approachable than I thought.
It is, and it's just going to keep getting easier as new tools and technologies come out.
This has been an incredible deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much about Professor Kuo, his work, and the whole idea of using data to make decisions. But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a question to think about. If you could analyze any data set in the world, what would it be? What questions would you ask? What would you hope to find out?
That's a great question, and that's what makes data analysis so exciting. The possibilities are endless.
And maybe one of our listeners will be inspired by Professor Kuo's work and start their own data journey.
I hope so. I think Professor Kuo would be happy to know he's inspired others to explore data and use it to make a difference.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. It's been great exploring Professor Kuo's work and his unique approach to data analysis.
It really has.
And remember, you don't need a PhD or a supercomputer to start thinking like a data analyst. Just start by paying attention to the data around you. Ask questions. Be open to what you discover.
You might surprise yourself.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We'll see you next time. You know, it's funny, as we've been talking, I've been thinking about how I can be more data-driven in my own work.
Oh, interesting.
I'm a writer.
Right.
So it's not like I'm dealing with spreadsheets and algorithms all day.
Yeah.
But I do work with a ton of information, research, interviews, notes. Now, I'm wondering if I could apply some of Professor Kuo's ideas to be more efficient, maybe even come up with news story ideas.
I think you totally could. It's like, even if you're not working with traditional data sets,
right,
there's still data everywhere.
That's true.
What if you tracked the sources you use the most, or the themes that keep coming up in your writing, or even the feedback you get from readers?
Oh, interesting.
You might start to see some patterns there.
Okay.
That could help you with your process or even lead to new creative directions.
That's a really cool idea. It's like I'm turning my writing process into data. And then by analyzing it, maybe I could find hidden connections. Or even challenge my own assumptions about what kind of stories I should be writing.
Right. It's about bringing that curiosity, that analytical mindset to your own work. Even if it doesn't feel like traditional data analysis.
This is really making me think differently about writing. And honestly, I think this goes beyond just writing or even business for that matter.
Right.
Professor Kuo's work has implications for any kind of problem solving or decision making.
I agree. It's all about being flexible in your thinking, being open to new ideas, and recognizing that sometimes the answers come from where you least expect them.
And maybe a little ancient wisdom can help us along the way.
I think Professor Kuo would like that.
Well, on that note, I think we should wrap up this deep dive. We've explored a lot today, from ancient Chinese philosophy to some really cool data analysis techniques.
It's been quite a journey.
But what really stands out to me is the power of combining different ideas, even if they seem totally separate at first. Professor Kuo's work is a perfect example of that.
It shows that the best solutions often come from thinking outside the box, challenging the usual way of doing things.
And maybe even bringing a bit of ancient wisdom into our modern world.
It's exciting to think about what we could achieve if we're more open to those kinds of approaches.
Well said. So to all our listeners out there, take some inspiration from Professor Kuo. Don't be afraid to be curious, to experiment, and to look for those hidden connections.
The world is full of data waiting to be discovered.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.